This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
And this is Brian Hettinger from Abby.
Today, we're going to talk about identity management in the federal government. Hit the music, Claude.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Today, we have Brian Hettinger. He is a Senior Director for Solutions and Mobile at a company called Abby, ABBYY.com. Now, there are many companies I've interviewed in the past, and the reason I brought Abby on is because I was at a trade show, and I heard something good news about Abby. They have innovation that can help my federal listeners, and that's what this show is all about. You know, what I try to do is bring new topics on so people who are in the federal government and trying to figure something out, they can have a new book on the shelf. They have another tool in the drawer they can pull out. And so the tool in the drawer today is Brian. Brian, I'm not calling you a tool, but that's what we're going to use it for. We're going to have you open up your world to the federal government so they can understand a little bit how Abby, ABBY.com, can help them. But before we begin, perhaps you can give me just a thumbnail sketch of Abby and where they fit in this whole world of identity management.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. Really appreciate your time today and all your listeners' time today. So Abby is actually a leader in intelligent document processing. So we're a company that's been around for a long time, and we've expanded our role in intelligent document process also into identity proofing. This whole concept of document-centric identity proofing and identity affirmation is really hot right now. Gartner recommends that these two solutions be combined. And frankly, in the marketplace, there's very few vendors that are offering any kind of technology like this. So this is a key area for Abby. We're helping federal governments, state governments, and all other industries as well. So it's an exciting area for us. Thank you, John.
Talk about excitement. I'm going to talk about an exciting movie, Back to the Future, because we're going to go back to the future, Brian. 20 years ago, you're just in diapers, I imagine, 20 years ago. Well, back 20 years ago, now it can be hard for you to understand this. You would waltz into an agency, let's say Interior. You'd get out your little PIV card, you'd waltz right in, and then down the hall, there was the server. And so what's the problem? There's no problem here. Things have slightly changed in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. So now we have John Gilroy. I'm not waltzing into the office. I'm working remotely. And the server isn't down the hall. The server could be in Denver. I don't know where the server is. And so a lot of problems present themselves that didn't happen 20 years ago, Back to the Future, did they, Brian?
That is so true, John. So many things have changed. Many of us, in fact, I can't even remember what life before the iPhone was, and now it's something we're all used to. I even had the opportunity, John, in my past of bringing this whole concept of mobile check processing. So being able to take a picture of your check from your phone and rather than having to go into a branch. And I was one of the few individuals that brought that to market. And, initially they thought we were crazy, and now it's just common. It's something that everybody uses. And it's that same kind of technology, similar kind of technology that we're doing today, but using it in the identity space along with all kinds of other documents associated with identity to be able to prove you are who you say you are remotely.
Well, this is so crazy. I have a daughter living in rural Africa. So someone sent a check here to her. So I took a picture of it, sent it to her, and she deposited it in her bank in Africa. It's like, whatever happened to walking in the bank and it closes at 2 and banker's hours? And it's just a different world, isn't it, Brian?
It is. It is a very different world we live in. And we're in this world where you have these big tech companies, Apple and Amazon, and, have created these experiences, and people are getting used to it. They're not only used to it, they're demanding it. They really expect that. And the federal government has to step up. So the world has changed, but there's a lot of opportunity within the federal government and government agencies to be able to adopt this kind of technology and make it a win-win for everybody, because it isn't just about the end user experience. I mean, certainly that's a key part, but it's also about improving the process for the federal government employees that are having to deal with this on the other side of the aisle too, or in the brick and mortar. So yeah, certainly things have changed.
I live in a small town in Virginia. They got a barbecue place with secret sauce. And so my question to you is, what is Abby's secret sauce? So what's the differentiator that you bring that other companies can't, for my federal listeners?
That's a great question, John. So one of the challenges today, or one of the biggest challenges today, is really what I call kind of pieces and parts. So today, there is technology that exists. The technology has evolved. If we were having this conversation maybe 5 or 10 years ago, the technology wouldn't have been mature enough. But the technology now exists today to be able to do all these different components. The challenge is that typically for a government entity to implement this identity proofing and document-centric identity affirmation technology, they have to work with maybe 5 different vendors. Well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to research all these different vendors? How are you going to figure out who's the best? Then on top of it, once you've done that, how are you going to ongoing work with them, update all their different systems? Then how are you going to gain the knowledge to make them all work together seamlessly and in a very efficient and accurate manner? Well, Abby has actually done all that hard work. So we're one of very few vendors out there that are offering a complete solution of document-centric identity proofing and identity affirmation. So we're combining all these characteristics of identity proofing. You have ID reading, you have ID verification, you have facial matching and liveness detection. Combining that with all these other components like trailing document processing. So being able to process any particular document for your specific use case. Maybe it's a birth certificate, or maybe, it's some other document specific to that particular need or use case of this situation. Being able to do that, having process intelligence, also having things like dynamic fraud detection, bringing all of these technologies together, John, in a way that provides an easy solution that's easy to implement. You have one throat to choke, and ultimately it ends up saving a bunch of money and ultimately allowing end users to be able to go through this onboarding process or go through this process remotely rather than always having to go into those brick and mortar locations.
So there's a concept you tossed out kind of, carefully. I don't know how to toss it out. Trippingly in the tongue, maybe. It's called identity proofing. So maybe you can define that for our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. So identity proofing is really about trying to understand who someone is and making sure they are who they say they are. So identity proofing in itself is typically multiple components. Typically, you're needing to take some identity document. The simplest form would be a driver's license or your passport or something like that, and being able to not only recognize it, but extract all of the data off of that. And often the first step in the process is maybe pre-filling a form. So we're able to use this smart auto capture technology. So all a user has to do is take their mobile phone and point it at their passport, for example, and it's automatically going to capture that image when all the conditions are right. So they're not getting a blurry image and everything looks good. We extract all that data, and now we can pre-populate the form maybe that they're using for some onboarding process. But then it doesn't stop there. You have to understand, is this truly an authentic document? There's something called ID verification. So is this really authentic, or has it been artificially created or tampered with, or is it a fraud? And it doesn't stop there, because typically the headshot from that ID document is extracted. And now we ask the users to do something most people are familiar with: take a selfie. And through that process, we're able to do facial matching. We use biometric technology to do facial matching to ensure you are who you say you are. Because I could have your ID, John, and it's a perfectly valid ID. But as soon as we do facial matching, that's not going to succeed because I'm not you. So being able to have all those different identity proofing components are really important when you're trying to do something remotely and not in an in-person environment. But of course, identity proofing is only part of it, but it is a key part of the process.
Motivation is important for distance athletes, for the people who run the Boston Marathon. And I think motivation is important for changing technology. If my daughter were to live 3 doors down from me, I would have taken a picture of the check. I'd have walked down the street and handed it to her. And so let's go back to the beginning of the show here. If, Brian, you and I worked in the same office and I got the wrong email, I just walked down your desk and, here, buddy, here, take this. But I think what happened is COVID has forced people to look at new solutions. And maybe it's forced people to look at Abby and go, well, my daughter's in Africa now, or I've got to commute 60 miles. I'm commuting remotely. And so maybe we have to look at Abby and see, maybe that's a way we can handle some of these documents. Is that what you've seen in the last few years?
That's exactly what we've seen, John. It's really interesting because there are two sides to that. COVID really accelerated this whole remote process. And one of the two sides is in terms of citizens, and offices are closed. We can't necessarily just go into some brick and mortar location. There were times when that simply wasn't possible. So how do we still meet the needs? Not to mention, generally none of us want to go into some brick and mortar location, stand in line. We get there and they say, oh, you need these documents. And we're like, oh, well, that's a bummer. We didn't bring all those documents. And now we got to go home and now we got to come back, stand in line again. And that's not generally a friendly process. So certainly that's something to be avoided. But the other side of this is for the employees. Think about the federal employees where their office maybe was closed. Well, how do they still need to do that work? And so through intelligent automation technology, we're able to take some of the work that they had to do in person in the brick and mortar location and automate it to where now from the comfort of their own home through a secure connection they can simply review and be a human in the loop for some of these processes. And rather than having to be so engaged, and therefore they can actually be much more productive. So those are certainly challenges. We actually did a survey recently, John, and what was interesting about this survey is that they said that in government applications, there's actually 1 in 5. On average, 1 in 5 people drop out. And the reason that those people drop out, or the main factors contributing to that, is that about a third say the biggest factor is the process is too long. Another third say that identity proofing and affirmation is a key pain point. And the last third say there's simply too many steps. It's too complicated a process. So certainly COVID did accelerate all these things, but it also kind of showed these pain points and really kind of ripped the Band-Aid off the situation, because there was a lot of organizations that had plans to improve the situation, but all of a sudden, it hit and they really had to accelerate those or be faced with some of these challenges. And so certainly we've been helping organizations address all these challenges and improve this situation, not only for that end user or that citizen experience, but also for their employees and being able to work remotely and more efficiently and be able to handle more volumes and actually do more higher value tasks as well.
Top of the show, I had this silly image of me walking into the Department of Interior DOI and I got my PIV and everyone's happy. Well, what happens if you're at FEMA and there's a flood somewhere and you have to get federal assistance? Well, do you have a PIV card? I didn't plan on getting flooded. And so there's situations that I think it kind of is highlighted by COVID, but it's always been there. I mean, there've been floods in the United States for 300 years, 200 years. And so it's nothing new. And so I think what could happen is if the federal government says you have to improve citizen services, but have a better user interface, well, then one way has got to be a more efficient identity management. I mean, that just seems like it's hand in hand with serving the citizens, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. One of the areas that there is a lot of fraud is actually with federal benefits. And people that are getting benefits that actually shouldn't be getting benefits. And part of it was because of COVID. Maybe they weren't going into some brick and mortar location. Maybe they didn't have the process in place to be able to check all those things. So, what we're finding, John, is that there are certain use cases right now. So, for example, one of the things in the U.S. is this initiative called Real ID, where we can essentially get a new ID that it's basically a combination of a state driver's license and a federal all in one. And what we're finding is that because there's some timing associated with getting your real ID and being able to have that federal document to be able to fly in the U.S. and other areas, there's some initiatives to get people this, but they have to go into brick and mortar location. It's complicated. So we're working with governments right now to be able to do that remotely. But what's interesting is, although that's the driver right now, simply because of timing, many of these government agencies already have plans to expand the same process, the same onboarding process, the same identity proofing and identity affirmation through using this document-centric approach that we've been talking about for all these other processes. Even, it could be simple things like getting a fishing and game license or all kinds of other different things that the local state or the federal government can offer. But certainly there are areas that are more prone to abuse or maybe have higher dollar values associated with them, or maybe there's more urgency around them for certain claims kinds of things. And those few areas are really key areas where this technology is frankly a no-brainer. It fits great and is a win-win for everyone.
Well, Brian, you have a degree in engineering, but you very carefully phrased that sentence there. It was like a PhD in English. I mean, we can just look down at Florida and go fraud and abuse, Florida. Okay. I mean, we can just look at the zip codes. So I'll say you can be more discreet about that, but I think we all know what's going on. And this isn't a couple $100. This is billions of dollars, and people are scamming the government. It's a terrible situation. It's a terrible situation.
It really is, John. And the other side of that too is also identity theft and that area. So it's impacting millions, billions of people. There's all kinds of fraud. There's all kinds of fines because of fraud. I mean, it's crazy, the situation, not only in the U.S., but globally, and not only in the federal government, but in the private sector as well. Yeah.
Well, you said the magic word, federal government. And I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, you're not. And in the Washington, D.C. here, we have a mandate. Every 13 minutes, we have to say zero trust. So if I'm buying apples, I got to say zero trust. If I'm getting oil change in the car, so I got to say zero trust. If you look at zero trust, which is a big push in the federal government now, here's the 6 pillars of zero trust. Here's the 7 pillars. Here's the 5 pillars. Every pillar, the first one is identification. I mean, that's the commonality in there. There could be 6 or 7, or I don't know how many pillars there are. I guess I have to study Greek architecture to figure out how many pillars there are, but it starts with identification. So what you're saying is that it is possible that the solution from Abby, ABBYY, might be able to help my listeners maybe get a handle on this whole process of identification as a first step to this huge amorphous picture of zero trust. Is that right?
That's right, John. And the thing that is key is that when you one of the things that you just said is really important, and that is there isn't just one pillar. There are multiple things, and that's what not only we have recognized, but even analysts like Gardner. It isn't just about doing ID reading. It isn't just about doing ID verification. It isn't just about trying to do facial matching. It isn't just about these trailing documents and being able to read other things and having this identity affirmation. It isn't just about data lookups. Frankly, it needs to be about most all of those things. You need to have a multifaceted approach. And there's an example, John, that I like to use because for me it's quite personal and sort of hits home with me. I've been part of some processes where they don't have a very good balance, I would say, of technology and human interaction. And what I mean by that is they'll ask me to fill in some information on a form, and then rather than asking for more information, they'll start asking me some questions. And these questions are things like, what was the color of my car 15 years ago? Well, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the idea. I don't know. I don't remember. And it's a little bit weird that you're asking me that. And so one of the things we really recommend is that you engage the citizens. They have an ID. They have their birth certificate. They have these documents. Well, engage them in the process. Even though it's required or it's best practice to do multiple things, it doesn't really matter if I need to take a picture of 1, 2, or 3 different documents. I can still do that in seconds or, just a minute or two. And yet I feel engaged in the process, and doing a selfie is something that most people are used to doing. And so it's a natural, easy part, and yet you're able to knock off lots of different steps and lots of different things to ensure the process is very secure. You're also doing a lot of things to eliminate fraud, and the other thing too, and if you want, we can chat about it more. But ultimately, this is something that's good for everybody because it also reduces the cost of transactions as well. So this isn't something that should be seen as something difficult. It's great for end users and it's great for employees and the government by both.
I interview a lot of different people. A couple months back, I interviewed a PhD in math, Dr. Elsa Schroeder, and she's on episode 40 if you want to listen to it. It's called The Rise of Machines and Federal Technology. We talked about mathematics and machine learning and a lot of pretty interesting topics, which brings me to identification, which brings me to the robots. I mean, there are non-person entities out there that need identification as well, don't they? I mean, this is almost like science fiction, I know, but it's true. I mean, there are systems that have NPEs that need to be identified. So where do you fit in with the federal problem inherent with processing, robotic process automation identities that are non-human? It seems like a science fiction question, but it's a real question, isn't it?
It is. There's all kinds of things. And certainly the robotic process automation is a key part. But typically when you look at what we're doing is we're really in the first part of the process. So oftentimes the key initial step is this onboarding process to determine who you are and are you a real user. And I need to not only understand that, but I need to affirm that. And that's really where our part plays the biggest part, John. And so when we're onboarding humans into some process, after that occurs, and certainly if maybe there's ongoing services, there are other techniques and other technologies that you're going to want to do to be able to affirm that and subsequent uses. But, there are, frankly, fraud is sophisticated these days. So, when you talk of automation, you talk of what robots can do, you could even have a robot that has some fake ID document and also has some fake picture of somebody. And it could be trying to use that, or some fraudster could be trying to do that as well. The technology that we use is so advanced, John, that it's actually using liveness detection. So although I mentioned that it's doing something as simple as having someone take their selfie, okay, the idea is that it is very simple for the end user, but what's actually going on behind the scenes is very complex. So with a selfie, what happens is this liveness detection is making sure this is not a picture. This isn't just some fake robot, some fraudster, whatever, that no, instead, this is actually a human that is alive and breathing and real. And only if it passes that liveness detection, then does it actually go on to be able to do the facial matching components and make sure truly you are who you say you are. So that is a big part of it. And some of these things I mentioned sound simple, but in fact, the technology behind it is quite complex. Whether it be that facial matching technology, and there's all kinds of, NIST standards and all of these kinds of certifications and blah, blah, blah. But even, the reading the documents, because it's not just about extracting a little bit of data. It's about truly understanding what is this document. What is the data that I'm extracting? Is this a name, or, this is a date, or, this is a birth date, not an expiration date? And it's truly understanding what all this information, all this data is, and being able to leverage and use that to make sure this isn't some fraudulent, some bot, etc. But no, this is instead some real life individual doing some proper process.
Brian, time to use 2 4-letter words. Are you ready? FCC is going to come down on us. And the words are deep fake. I mean, I imagine your technology can be used to recognize deep fakes. I have a friend named Chase Cunningham.
Right.
He plays around with this all the time. It's hilarious. I think it's really funny until I realize that people are good at it, aren't they?
They are. It's exactly right, John. And this deep fake it's a big deal. And the technology has also advanced. One of the things that I really like about the technology that we have is that it's easy, as I mentioned before. In the past, to be able to stop this deep fake kind of technology, in the past, you had to do a quite complex process. It wasn't just about taking a selfie. You had to basically put your, like taking a selfie, but then you had to rotate your head and maybe you had to blink, and you have to do this complex process, which frankly is a challenge and leads to abandonment. And not everybody is going to actually follow the instructions. So the technology has advanced enough to where now we can do simply things like take a selfie or two, something very easy to the end user, and yet do that advanced technology to prevent deep fakes. Yeah, absolutely, John.
I think of intelligent document processing from years ago, and that meant scanning something. Now, this has gone like from, the Wright brothers to going to the moon. It's like, okay, let's look at Kurzweil from a few years ago, and it was a pretty big deal. It's a nice trick. It's incredible the amount of sophistication you could have with this information now. It's at the cutting edge, and there may be people that resist this because it's unbelievable in some ways, isn't it?
It is. But the thing that I would encourage users to understand and everybody that's listening to understand is that some of this, if we were having this conversation 5 or 10 years ago, yeah, it would be too cutting edge. And frankly, what I like to call sometimes bleeding edge. Yeah. But it is advanced. And, now when we think about what happens in document processing, you're right. That artificial intelligence, that machine learning, it's also doing natural language processing. So it can understand and read information within the documents and actually know what that information is, know where to put that information, know what to do with it, just like a human would. But there's other areas too, like process intelligence. This is a key area for us as well in process mining, because what it can do is it can go in and look at the larger process and find bottlenecks that occur. And, as humans, we have sometimes, and we don't even do this on purpose, but sometimes we have a bias or maybe an opinion or something. And frankly, what we found in many cases is using process mining and process intelligence uncovers things that the humans, that the rest of us or the rest of the people close to it didn't even know what was going on. So there's a way for efficiency there that can be uncovered. And then as we're talking about proof of identity, yeah, there's all kinds of, this advanced artificial intelligence, whether it's looking at the ID and looking at all the security features and being able to look at little tiny things that even our human eyes can't even detect. That may have been manipulated in a document, and using technology to do that, to also what we talked about with the deep fakes and selfie and facial matching and all of that biometrics. So yeah, the technology has very much advanced, but to the citizen, that's maybe looking for some benefits, or maybe they're being onboarded for some other new process, it's a very simple experience for them. They're not exposed to the lots of complexity going on. But what's also cool with technology, John, is we're able to use all that automation and technology and be able to do all that within seconds. It isn't something now, computers are advanced. It isn't something that takes, minutes or hours to process. Certainly if you have the old way or the current way where typically somebody has to go through that stack of papers, yeah, that's going to take hours or days or weeks. They're usually overworked, but the computer can scale, the servers can scale, and they can do it in seconds. Yeah. So, yeah.
2 years ago, I had a student working for Deloitte, and he handed me his business card. He had UI UX on his business card. And I said, "Ooh, this is pretty trendy." And when I think about what you just said, if we take the last half hour and have a transcript of it and highlight all the important things, it seems like the technology is fine and the intelligent automation is fine. But the end here is user experience. It's just like, okay, this is a guy in the VA can get his claim done. Someone can get a FEMA trailer. Someone can get a loan for flood relief. It seems like if you keep your eye on the end of the race, or the end of the race is, we can dazzle you with all this fancy talk and everything else. But if you can give a better user experience, that's going to help accomplish an agency's goals. It seems like that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
I agree, John. We usually talk about a few different things. Some might approach it from a fraud perspective. Some might approach it from a cost reduction perspective. Certainly there's some numbers and statistics out there where, doing something in a brick and mortar is much more expensive when someone walks in to do that transaction versus doing it remotely. And that's even been proving back to the checks that we talked about early on. So there's a few different areas, but at the end of the day, usually the most compelling one, and usually the one that hits all of us at home, hits our hearts. We don't want to stand in line. We want to have a great user experience. All these other technology companies, etc., have given us this instant situation where we can do things very easily from our mobile phone, sitting from the comfort of our home, and do what we need. And yeah, being able to do that and in federal and government agencies is a key, and that is really what it's about, having that great user experience.
Well, our users had a good experience listening to you, and so I want to thank you for your time here. It's a whole new world for ABBYY. Many people have not heard about it. Go to their site. They have articles about success they've had in many aspects of helping federal agencies reach their goals. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Brian Hettinger, Senior Director of Solutions and Mobile at ABBYY. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.